Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to add new ranged weapons to Survival Game Kit V2. This video is for Unreal Engine 5 and it's for Survival Game Kit versions that are 2.4 or newer. If you're using Unreal Engine 4 or you're using an older version of Survival Game Kit V2, I'll have a link in the description to the video you should follow instead. So getting started, you can see I've got a folder here with my new gun in it. This gun is from the Epic's Lyra project. So you can see I've got my mesh, my skeleton, my physics asset, and then I've got a couple of character animations for attaching and detaching a magazine. And then I've also got the weapon animations for attaching and detaching the magazine. With your new weapon, you may just have a single reload animation for the weapon and the character. You can split that out into having an attach and detach. The easiest way to do that is to duplicate your reload animation, then open up one of them, and I'll bring this over here. Then you can find the point at which your magazine gets removed, so say around here. You can right click this marker and you can remove either the frames before the marker, so all of these, or you can remove all the frames after the marker. And you can use that to create a split reload animation, so you have a detach and attach animation. You would also need to do the same thing to your weapon reload animations as well, so that you have an attach and detach animation for the weapon mesh. So to get started, we're going to head to Survival Game Kit, Blueprints, Items, Holdable Items, and in here is all of our holdable item blueprints. Now the easiest way to add a new ranged weapon is to duplicate one of the existing ones. So if you're making a rifle, you'd probably want to use the M4. If you're making a shotgun, you'd probably want to use the shotgun blueprint. Or if you're making a pistol, you'd probably want to use the pistol blueprint. But for this video, I'm making a rifle, so I'm going to duplicate the M4. And I'm going to rename this to just BP underscore new weapon, like that. And we'll open this up and we'll click open full blueprint editor. Then we can double click any of our components to open up the viewport. You can see we've got our M4 mesh here at the moment. So we're going to select the skeletal mesh component, and in the skeletal mesh asset, you can see currently it doesn't have an asset assigned. This is a Unreal 5.4 bug. If you compile and then change this to just any skeletal mesh, you'll see it doesn't update. But if you compile and then change the mesh again, so I'll search for my weapon mesh, I'll set it to rifle, you can see it updates. Yours might not have this problem if you're using a newer engine version, but that's how you get around the mesh not working. So you can see we've now got our new rifle. I'm just going to compile. Then we're going to select the bullet spawn location component. We're just going to move this. I'm just going to untick snapping. I'm just going to move this to near the end of the barrel, something like this. You want it a little bit in front of your barrel, so you just want it to line up with the end of your gun. Then we'll compile. Next, we're going to go to the class defaults, and in here we're going to search for attachment. You can see that we've got our allowed attachments, so these are the attachments that can be attached to this gun. We've got the default attachments. These are the attachments that the gun will start with when it's spawned. And then we've got the available attachment slots. So these are the slots that this gun has. So for allowed attachments, they're all the M4 ones because we duplicate the M4. So I'm just going to clear this by clicking the trash can icon. And then the default attachments, they're also the M4 ones. So I'm going to clear those out just so our gun doesn't use those attachments. Then we'll compile. Next, we need to make an item for our new weapon. So we're going to head to the content browser, then blueprints, items, and open up the item list. Then we're going to find the item that we duplicated. So for me, that's going to be the weapon M4A4. I'm just going to duplicate that row. Then we'll double click the row name here. And I'm going to rename this to weapon underscore new weapon, like that. And then we can start editing some of the items settings here. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these settings because there's separate documentation on adding new items that explains all of these different settings. But I will change some of the basic ones and the things that we need for our holdable. So I'm just going to change the name to new weapon, like that. Of course, you can change the description, weight, size of your item and everything if you want to. Then if we go down, we've got the skeletal mesh. So this is the mesh that's used when our item is dropped in the ground, on the ground. So I'm going to change this to my rifle and I'll select that. Then we're going to go down to the holdable details. And in here is where we've got some of our settings for our holdable. So first we've got our holdable slots. These are the weapon slots that our weapon can be equipped to. So you can change these or remove them. Currently we've got both primary and secondary. Then we've got our holdable class. We need to change this to our new weapon. So that's going to be BP underscore new weapon, and select that. Then we've got the holdable slot sockets. So this is the socket that the weapon will attach to on the character skeleton when it's equipped to the primary weapon slot, and then this is the socket that will be used if equipped to the secondary weapon slot. So you can set custom sockets here if you wanted to, and then you could go into your character, create that socket with the same name, and adjust its location and rotation. Then we've got our equipped and unequipped montages. This allows you to set what montage will play when we equipped and unequip the item. You can see that we've got a skeletal mesh set here. This allows you to add multiple equipped and unequip montages and have it choose which one it should use depending on your character's mesh. So if you had a male and female mesh, you could set those here and then set different montages here if you wanted to. But for now, we're just going to leave this as is. Then we've got the only holdable when equipped. This basically means that if this option is turned on, we won't be able to hold our item if it's in a normal inventory slot. So if our gun is in our backpack, we won't be able to hold it. We'll have to equip it to a weapon slot to be able to hold that item. Next, we need to set up a world item blueprint for our weapon so we can drag it into the level and our player can pick it up. So we're going to go to the blueprints folder again, items, then go to the world items. And in here, we're going to search for skeletal, and we want to right click the skeletal master item and do create child blueprint class. Then in here, we're just going to name it BP underscore new weapon underscore WI. Then we'll get rid of this search and we'll search for new weapon to find our blueprint. Open that up, and there we go. And in here, we want to go to class defaults, then to item. You can see here we can set a row name for our item. So we're going to set that to weapon underscore new, and we want new weapon. This will be your row from the item list. And we'll set that. Then we'll compile. Now you can see my item has appeared and it's actually laying horizontal. And the reason it's doing that and not standing up vertically is because in the item list with our new weapon row selected, if you scroll down to the bottom, we've got item offsets. Now, because I duplicated the M4, that already has an offset here, which allows us to rotate the item in our world item. So if yours is standing up vertical, you can come in here and adjust the rotation values. So now we can actually place our new weapon in the level. So I'm just going to drag that out like that. And we can check to make sure that we can interact with it. So we're going to hit play. I'm just going to run over to the weapon quickly. And you can see if I look at the weapon, we get our options appear. If yours don't appear, then it's probably because your skeletal mesh doesn't have a physics asset. So you can see here in my gun folder, mine has a physics asset, and this basically acts as the collision for the weapon. So if you don't have a physics asset for your mesh, you need to right click your weapon mesh, go to create physics asset, and then create and assign. Next, we're going to go to the character skeleton. So we'll get rid of this search, survival game kit, meshes, skeletal, and then find the mannequin skeleton here. If you're using a custom skeleton for your character, you'll need to go to that. And I'll open this up. And if we scroll down, you'll see that we've got all of the sockets for our weapons that attach to our character. So what we're going to do is select the hand underscore R, do add socket, select the new socket. We're going to rename this to hand underscore R new weapon. You can name this a name of your weapon if you like. And you can see we've now got our new socket. Now I'm going to roughly just position this where I think the weapon's going to go. We'll come back and adjust this a bit later. So I'm just going to put mine sort of roughly here like that. And then we can save. Next, we're going to add our left hand socket to our weapon skeleton. So we're going to go back to the content browser. You'll want to find your weapon skeleton. So for me, that's this. I'm going to open that up. And in here, I'm going to select the root bone. So this is a top level bone. Right click, add socket, select the new socket and name it left hand, the same as I have here. Then we're going to just, again, roughly place it where we think the left hand should go. So I'm just going to put mine about here. Again, we'll come back and adjust this later. Then we'll save this. Next, we're going to set up our weapons holdable animation layer, and that's what tells the character what animations it should play when we hold our weapon. So to do that, we'll go to the content browser, survival game kit, animations, layers, and in here you can see we've got layer blueprints for all of our different holdable weapons. Now I'm going to be duplicating the M4 just because that's what we started with the holdable blueprint, but if you did the shotgun you would want to do the shotgun, if you did the pistol you'd want to do the pistol. So we're going to duplicate the M4 anim layers, right click that and duplicate, and we're going to rename it. So I'll get rid of M4A4, I'm going to put new weapon, and I'll get rid of the one at the end, like that. Then we'll open this up, and in here is where we can actually set all of our weapons animations. So to start changing our animations, we can go to the class defaults here, and you can see we've got a third person category. This is where we set all of our third person animation settings. Then if we scroll down, you should find the first person category as well. And this is where we would set all of our first person animations. So scrolling back up, if we open up the anims, you can see that we've got standard, combat and aimed anims. And these allow you to control which animations are played depending on your character's current stance. So if we open up the combat anims, you can see we've got idle anims. If we open that up, we've got idle, crouch idle, then movement, we've got movement and crouch movement. Then we've got all of our jump animations, and then we've got our overlay animations. Now our overlay animations are used to only play an animation on the character's head and their arms. So this is useful if, say for example, you had a new weapon, but you didn't have a full set of movement animations for them. You could use, say, the rifle animations for movement, and then use an idle animation just for your weapon that will only affect the upper arms. And you can set different ones for each movement state the character's in. If these are left empty, then the arms and head will just use their movement from the standard movement animations up here. And if we hide our combat anims here, you can see that if we open up aim anims, for example, we've got exactly the same settings here. So you can go through and set the animations that you want to use for each stance. So if you do have custom animations, this is where you'll come to change out the animations to use your own. If you want to stop now and start changing those, you can. Moving on, we've got our aim offset. Now all of the weapons in Survival Game Kit use procedural aim offset, which basically means it uses code to determine how the character will look in the camera's direction. So that allows us to aim in a specific direction. If you want to, you can set this to standard and actually set aim offset animations here if you want to. But for now, we're just going to leave this as procedural. Then we've got our turn in place animations. These allow us to set the montage that will play when our character turns. So we've got our standing animations and then our crouch animations here. Next, we've got our hand IK and elbow IK settings. I'll come back to those a little bit later on in the video. Then we've got the body blending. Now this controls what part of the body actually has the aim offset applied to it. So for weapons, you're pretty much always going to want this to be spine, and that will basically mean the whole upper body will look in the direction that the camera is facing. And if you were to change this to neck, then only the head would look in the direction that the camera is facing. So for our weapon, we're just going to leave this as spine. Then moving down, we've got disable right hand IK sprinting. If this is enabled, then our right hand IK will be disabled whenever our character starts sprinting. Then we've got our left hand weapon socket. This is the socket that we added to our rifle skeleton, if you remember. That tells the left hand that that's the socket that we want to use for its location. Then down here we've got some debug settings, we've got some adjust settings for our IKs. We'll use those a little bit later to actually adjust our IKs, but for now we can leave those. We've got a debug mode that will give you some information while you're playing, and then we've got a debug type which allows you to choose where you're getting the debug information from. Then we've got weapon sway, which basically causes the end of the gun to lag a little bit behind the direction that you're looking, and this gives the weapon a bit of feeling of weight. So if you want that, you can leave this on, or if you want to disable it, you can untick that. Then we've got some bone names here. You shouldn't have to change these unless you change your character skeleton, and basically this should be set to whatever your right hand bone name is, and this should be set to your head bone name. Then moving down, we've got our first person animations, and these are very similar to our third person animations. We've got an option for each stance. If we open them up, you can see we've got our idle anims, our movement anims, and our jump anims. And then further down, we've got our hand IK and elbow IK settings, and these are only for our first person view. Just a quick tip, if you do start changing the animations in here, say you wanted the combat animations and the aimed animations to be exactly the same, you could set the animations in your combat animations, right click, do copy, and then you can right click and paste onto the aimed anims, and it will copy and paste all the animations that you have set in the combat anims to the aimed anims. That just saves a little bit of time when you're setting these up. Next, we need to actually set our weapon to use this animation blueprint, because right now it's still using our M4's animation blueprint. So to do that, we'll go back to our new blueprints holdable, and we'll, in the class defaults, we're going to search for animation, and we want layers. You can see here we've got a setting for animation layers, and we can set a skeletal mesh. And this basically allows you to set your character's skeletal mesh and then what animation layer you want it to use. Again, this is useful if you have, say, a male and a female character. You can have different animation layers for each one. But for now, we're just going to be using the Manny character, and we're going to change this from our N4 anim layers to our new weapon anim layers like that. And that tells the weapon that that's the animation blueprint we want to use. Now, another thing we need to do in here quickly is change the socket that our weapon uses. So I'm just going to search for socket. You can see currently it's still set to our hand underscore our M4, and we want that to be the socket that we created in here instead. So I'm just going to double click that, copy the name, go back to our weapon blueprint and paste that in here. You need to make sure that this name is exactly the same as the socket in your character skeleton, or it won't work. Then we'll compile. So now we're ready to start adjusting our sockets in game. One thing you do want to make sure you do is in your animation blueprint, if you have changed out animations in here, you want to make sure that you compile before playing. So we'll go to showcase, hit play. I'm just going to run over to the weapon and we're going to hold it. We're going to see what we're working with. Okay, so currently our weapon is facing the wrong direction. That's fine. We're going to do Shift F1, grab the character's skeleton here. I'm just going to drag it to sort of down here so we can see it while we're playing. So we'll go to showcase, and in here with our socket selected, we're just going to try rotating it. So I'm going to rotate it about 90 degrees like that. So now our weapon is facing the same direction, and if we want to spend more time tweaking how our weapon sits in our hand, we can eject, and over here we can take a closer look. You can ignore the first person meshes, we're just looking at our third person hands here. So with our socket selected, I'm just going to move our weapon about to get it roughly where I want it. Maybe rotate it. Oh, let's turn off the snapping for our rotation. So we'll untick that, and we'll get this to be about where we want it to be, like that. Then we're going to change our left hand socket. You can see our left hand isn't where we want it to be. So to do that, I'm just going to go to the weapon skeleton. We'll drag it to this window. We'll click showcase again. And then with our left hand socket selected, you can see as we move it, it updates the location. So I'm going to try rotating it a bit to get it closer to where I want. Move it up, and we'll try moving it along a bit as well. So that will do for me. Obviously you can spend as much time as you like getting this exactly where you want the weapon to be, but for now that's going to be fine. So now we'll just save both our skeleton and our mannequin, and we can exit out of playing in editor. So next I'll show you how we can adjust our weapon's hand IKs. So before we do that, I'm just going to drag our mannequin and weapon skeleton back up here, and we'll go back to our animation blueprint, and we'll go back up to the top here, and we want to collapse these categories, and we'll open up the hand IKs category here. So in here we can enable and disable both the right and left hand IKs. Our left hand IK will always try to go to the weapon's left hand socket. Then our right hand IK will try to go to the locations that we set here. So we've got a location for when we're not aiming and a location for when we are aiming. So if you do want to adjust the right hand IK location, I'll show you how to do that now. So we'll start with the unaimed right hand IK. We're going to copy the location, then go to your character's skeleton. We're going to search for hand, and we want to select right hand IK and set relative location. We're going to do right click and paste. Then we want to go back to the weapon blueprint, copy the rotation, then we'll paste that into the rotation of our socket and our skeleton. Then we're going to go back to our animation blueprint, scroll down to debug, and make sure that you tick on adjust right hand IK like that. So now we can actually adjust our IK while the game's playing. So what we'll do is grab our character skeleton, and I'm just going to drag it sort of down here, something like this, make it a little bit bigger. And then we'll hit play, we'll pick up our weapon, hold it, and then do Shift F1 to get our mouse. And then in here with our right hand IK socket selected, we can start moving it, and it will actually update our hand's location in game. So say we wanted to move our gun down to, say, here, we could. And if you want to rotate it, you can do that as well. So you can add some rotation. And then once you're happy with the position, you can copy the relative location like that. Go to the weapon animation blueprint. I'm just going to move this to the middle here. Then for our third person right hand IK, we paste that into location, copy the relative rotation from our socket and paste that into rotation like that. So now in the future, when we hold our weapon and we're unaimed, it will be using the position that we just set in game. Next, we can adjust our aimed location. So we're just going to copy the location from our aimed right hand IK, paste that into location, then copy the rotation and paste that into the relative rotation. We'll just move this window back over here. And then in game, we're going to right click. So we go into aimed, Shift F1, and then we can start moving our socket again to choose where we want our gun to go when we're aiming. So maybe you want it a little bit higher, you can rotate it. And then once you're happy, again, we're just going to copy the location, go back to our animation blueprint. We're going to paste this into the location under the aimed right hand IK, paste that in, and then do the same thing with the rotation and paste that in here. So now we've finished adjusting our hand IKs, you want to make sure that you always untick the adjust hand IK option down here once you're finished. Otherwise the weapon won't use these values, they'll actually use your socket's current location. Now the process for editing your first person hand IK locations is exactly the same as what we've just been through there. If you open up the hand IKs under first person, you can see you've got the same options. We've got the right hand and then the aimed right hand, and you can set those values down here. You can adjust them the same way that we just did. Obviously, you need to make sure that you do tick on this option so you can move the IK around in game. The only difference is you'd probably want to be in the first person camera view when you're adjusting this so you can see what your player would see. Next, I'll show you how you can adjust the elbow IKs. So we'll scroll back up to the third person and open up elbow IKs. And here you can see we've got a right hand or a right elbow IK and a left elbow IK. So we can set the location values we want for those. This process is pretty much the same as adjusting your hand IK, we just use a different socket. So I'm going to move down to our debug, I'm going to enable adjust elbow IK, tick that on. Then we're going to copy our right elbow IK, go to our character skeleton down here, we'll search for elbow. You can see that we've got a right elbow IK socket, we're just going to paste that into our location like that. Then I'll move this over here. We'll zoom out a little bit so we can see our socket. And then in game, you can see we can actually start adjusting it, and it adjusts our elbow IK as well. So once we get to a position I like, so say about here, we can just copy that location, move this over here, and we'll paste that into our right elbow IK. Then we can do the same thing with our left, so we'll just copy that, select the left elbow IK and paste that into the location. Then we can start adjusting this in game. So I'm just going to go to the showcase, move this over here, and we might have to eject for this because we can't really see our left elbow. So we'll eject and we'll start moving around our elbow position. So you can choose where you want your left elbow to go. So I'm happy with about that. So I'm just going to copy that location, go back to our animation blueprint for our weapon, and we can paste that into the left elbow IK like that. Then we've got some other settings here for the elbow IKs. You can enable this option here, and this basically allows you to set different right and left hand elbow IKs if your character's in the standard stance. But for now, we're just going to leave these. You can adjust them in the exact same way that we did just now. But don't forget to untick your adjust elbow IK setting once you've finished adjusting your elbow IKs. Then if we go down to first person, again, adjusting the elbow IKs for the first person is exactly the same. We can open up these options here. You can see we've got the same options down here as well. If you want to adjust those, you can do that in the same way we just did. So that's pretty much everything for the weapons animations. So we can now save all of this and we'll X out of Play and Editor, compile our animation blueprint, and we'll save that. And we'll head over to our weapons holdable blueprint again. And in the class defaults, we'll get rid of this search. Now this is where you'll find most of your weapons settings. So we'll start, I'll just hide this category because we don't need that. First we've got our max ammo, so this is the maximum amount of ammo that can be loaded into the weapon, not including magazines. So you can see currently it's set to 1 for the bullet in the chamber. Then we've got allowed ammo types. This is where you set the ammo items that can be fired by this weapon. We've got allowed chambering, which allows you to put a bullet into the gun. Then we've got allowed chambering reload with a magazine attached. If this is true, you can chamber a gun even if it has a magazine attached to it. Then we've got chamber amount. This is how many of our ammo items it will try to add into the gun at once. Then we've got chamber next round. So if you have a magazine attached and you fire the gun, the next bullet will be chambered into the gun. So if you remove the magazine, the gun would still have 1 bullet in it. Allow chambering in an inventory allows you to drag a bullet onto your weapon when it's in the inventory to add ammo to it. Then we've got our delay settings. So this controls how much of a delay between the player spamming the fire button before a fire can be allowed again. Then we've got our auto fire rate, so this is how quickly the gun will fire when in auto mode. Our burst count, so how many bullets per burst. We've got the range of the bullets. The weapon channel should always be set to weapon. We've got single shot, which just means the gun fires 1 shot. If you're making a shotgun, you'd want to untick this, and this is how you control how many shots your weapon does. Then we've got the fire from socket, which we'll add to our weapons skeleton. So we'll copy this name, the muzzle name. We'll go to our weapon. We'll right click the root bone, add a socket. I'm just going to change the name to muzzle like that. And then we'll quickly move this to the end of our weapon about here like that. And we'll go back to our weapon blueprint. Then we've got the per shot item cost. So this is how many bullet items each shot the gun takes will use up. We've got our fire modes. We've got our recoil. So this is how much recoil is applied to the camera when we fire a shot. We've got the spread values. So this controls how accurate the gun is when in these different states. The lower the value, the more accurate the gun is. Then we've got the maximum amount of spread that's allowed, which is 40. So that would be quite inaccurate. We've got the amount of spread that will increase. So as you shoot, the spread increases as the gun becomes less accurate. Then we've got the reduction rate. So this is how quickly the gun's spread reduces down after you've been firing. And then we've got the min spread per shot. So this is the minimum amount the spread can increase per shot of the gun. Then we've got settings to increase spread depending on the distance the bullet travels. We've got sound settings here. We can set the character's fire animation here. Then we've got the weapons fire animation, so this would be the animation for the actual weapon. Then we've got the chamber animations for the character and weapon. We've got the aimed fire animation, so if you have a different animation for shooting the gun while aiming, you can set that here. Then moving down, we've got settings for the muzzle effect, so this is the effect happening at the end of the weapon when you fire. Then we've got settings for decals, particle effects, and sounds for when the bullet actually hits a surface. Those can be assigned here. There's more info about this in the documentation that you can take a look at. Then we've got the damage settings. Now if use ammo damage values is ticked on, that means that these values will be ignored, and instead it will use the damage values in your ammo's items item list row. So if we go to here and I search for ammo, you can say select the M4 ammo here, and in the ammo details you can see that we've got settings here. So if that option is turned on in your weapon, we'll be using those damage values instead of these. If you want to just use the weapon's damage values, you can untick this. You can set the damage values for each hitbox here, and you can set the damage type. We've got bleeding, so you can enable bleeding. You can control how long the bleed lasts for and how much damage the bleed does. You've got the debug settings here, so you can enable these to see the actual line trace used to determine the bullet's path. Moving down, we've got whether or not the weapon can aim. You can enable some additional debug settings. You can control the FOVs and the starting FOVs. We've got the weapon sway, so as I mentioned before in the animation blueprint, as your character looks around, it adds a little bit of delay to the weapon to make it feel like it's got weight. You can adjust those settings here to adjust how quickly that moves. And if you are unsure about a setting, you can mouse over them to get a tooltip, and I'll give you some more information about what each setting does. Then moving down, we've got our attachment settings that we covered earlier. We've got durability settings, so if you want the gun to reduce its durability, you can set that here, and also how much it reduces by per shot. Then we've got leaning settings here, which allow you to control if you can lean with the weapon and how far you'll lean. We've got clipping, so if your character gets too close to a wall, to stop the gun going through it, the gun will be turned away. These are the settings you can use to control that. This allows you to control how close the character can be to a surface, how large the check that's done to make sure the weapon doesn't check is, and you can also disable this by just unticking this option here. Then moving down, we should have our reloading settings, so allow reload cancel. If this is enabled, the player will be able to cancel or reload. Then we've got our stance settings, so this just means whether or not the character is allowed to attack while in standard stance, and whether or not the character can change stance, and then the default stance is combat. Then we've got our movement settings down here, so these are our different movement speeds depending on our character's current state. Then lastly, we've got our camera shake settings down here. There is separate documentation on how these work that you can go and take a look at, but these basically determine how much the camera shakes when you're holding this particular weapon. You can also disable it by unticking this option here. So that's all of the weapon settings covered. Lastly, I'm just going to be explaining how you can add a magazine for your new weapon here. I'm not going to be going into too much detail because there is a separate video on how to make attachments, but I will be just covering the basics of getting your magazine set up. So to get started, we'll go to the content browser, survival game kit, blueprints, items, attachment items, and I'm going to duplicate the M4 attachment. So we'll just duplicate that. I'm going to change the name to new weapon magazine attach, and we'll open that up and go to the viewport, and in here you can change your static mesh, so you can select the magazine component, and over here you can change the mesh. I'm just going to be using this one. Then if we go to class defaults, you can change some of the settings about this magazine, so you can set the magazine to the attachment type, you can set the socket that this will attach to, and we'll actually add this to our weapon now, so our magazine will attach. So we'll just copy this name, go to our weapon skeleton, and most weapons are going to have a magazine bone, so you'll want to find yours, right click it and add a socket to it. If yours doesn't, then you can add it to the root bone if you like, but with our magazine socket selected, we're going to paste the name in here, so make sure that our magazine socket, we'll rename it here as well, is set to magazine, and we'll save that and head back to our attachment. Next, we're going to set up our attach and detach animation. So we'll go back to the content browser. I'm going to open up the attach animation for the character. And in here, we're going to set the marker to about here. Then we're going to right click on the notifies track, do new notify. And we want to search for BP underscore spawn weapon attachment and create that. Then move to about here in the animation. And we want to right click again, notify, search for BP underscore attach. We want attach weapon attachment like that. Then we'll save this. Then we're going to go back to the content browser, open up detach, right click the notifies, add notify and search for BP underscore remove attachment. We're going to put that near the beginning. Then we're going to move it along to around here. And we're going to add, or right click, do add notify. We want BP underscore destroy attachment like that. Next, we'll go back to the content browser and we're going to right click our attach animation, go to create Anim montage. Then we're going to do the same thing with detach. So we'll right click to create Anim montage. Then we'll open up the attach. And in here, we want to change the slot name to the upper body post AO group. Then do the same thing with the detach. So slot name, upper body post AO group, like that. Then we're going to duplicate the detach. So duplicate that one. We're going to rename it to swap, like that. Open up the swap montage, and we're just going to go to the blend out, and we want to set blend out time to 0, and then save that. Next, we need to go to the item list and add a new magazine item. So I'm just going to search for magazine, and we're going to duplicate the existing M4 magazine. So I'm just going to have that selected and click duplicate. Then we're going to rename this to magazine underscore new weapon, like that. Now, again, you can go through these settings and change your names, weights. You can change the icons and the UI details, but I'm just going to be focusing on the main attachment settings. So we're going to go down to attachment details here. You need to make sure its attachment is ticked on. The next thing is our attachment. We want to change this to our new one. So underscore new weapon magazine attach, like that. Next, we'll go to the attach animation. We want to change this to our new attach montage. So for me, I'm going to search for new weapon, and I want my attach montage. We'll do the same for detach. So I'm going to search for new weapon, and I've got my detach montage, and then do the same thing for the swap. So new weapon, swap montage. Then going down, we've got our attach and detach animations for our weapon. So you can see here, the first thing we want to do is change this mesh, because currently it's set to the M4. So I'm just going to set this to my new rifle mesh, and you'll set this to your weapons mesh, like that. Then we need to change these animations. So I'm going to change mine to rifle attach, and I want to find my new rifle. There we go. Attach animation, and I'm going to search for, I think it's web. There we go, web detach. So you want your attach and detach animations for your weapon in here. Then I don't have separate first person animations for this weapon, but if you want to set those, you can do here, and in the swap animations. I'm just going to be using the third person one. So I'm just going to copy the attach animations here, paste that onto first person attach, copy the detach, and paste that onto the first person detach, and then the same with the swap as well. Paste that onto first person swap, like that. There is a setting in between these animations called can only remove/add when the weapon is held. If this is turned on, then your character has to be holding the weapon for this attachment to be added or removed from the weapon. Now, if you did want to change the amount of ammo that your magazine can store, you can scroll up and find the container details. And in here, we've got the item count limit. Now, this is how many bullets the magazine can fit. So if you wanted to, you can increase this to 60. There's also an option here for restricted items. This controls what items are allowed to be put into the magazine. So you can see right now this magazine is only allowed to store the M4 ammo. If you wanted to add other different types of ammo, you could click this add button and set them in here. Or if you wanted to change the ammo that's allowed in this magazine, you could change the item in here. Next, we're going to head back to our weapon blueprint, and we're going to set up our attachments so this gun can actually use our magazine. So we'll just search for attach, and we'll go to allowed attachments, add a new entry, and set this to our BP underscore new, and we want our new weapon magazine attach. Then we can also set default attachments. So if you want your gun to spawn with its magazine, you can add that in here. So I'm going to do that. You need to set the data table to master item list, and set the item to search for magazine. We want magazine underscore new weapon. So now our weapon will spawn with that magazine. So now we can test this out in game. We may need to adjust our magazine's location, but that's fine. We can just modify the socket. So what we'll do is we'll hit play. We'll run over to our magazine quickly, or to our weapon. We'll hold that, and we'll do Shift F1 eject, and we can take a look at our weapon. So we can see that my magazine is actually the wrong way. Now obviously this gun has a built-in magazine, so it's not going to look great for me, but if you do want to adjust your magazine's location, we can do that. We'll just open up our rifle skeleton, and I'll just move this so it's a bit bigger, and then we can select our magazine socket. We can actually adjust this, so I can try rotating it about 90 degrees that way. I can move it around if I need to, move the location somewhere like that, and we can get our magazine into a good point, so somewhere like that. So that's how you can adjust your magazine if you need to. So we'll just save this and we can close this out. We'll exit out of play, hit play. Now we can just test out our gun, make sure everything's working as it should. We'll hold our weapon. Just going to grab a backpack and we can open up our attachments. You can see I've got 60 ammo because that's what I set to in the item list. I can remove the magazine, I can attach it, and if we grab some ammo, we can detach the magazine, add our ammo in and reattach it, and then we can shoot as well, and that's all working. So that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully you guys found it helpful, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below.